If you come to my office, you'll see that I have a sign on my wall, and it captures for me what being a person of faith is all about. It's a quote from Lord Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi of Great Britain when he wrote it. It reads, "In Judaism, faith is not acceptance, but protest against the world that is, in the name of the world that is not yet, but ought to be." This Shabbat, as we celebrate the work our congregation does towards healing the world, doing the important work of Tikkun Olam, and we highlight organizations dedicated to creating a better world for our children, I am honored and humbled to introduce to you a man who has dedicated his life to standing in protest of the world that is, in the name of the world that ought to be. David Lawrence Jr., who retired in 1999 as the publisher of the Miami Herald to work in the area of early childhood development and readiness, is the president of the Early Childhood Initiative Foundation. He leads the Children's Movement of Florida, which is aimed at making children the state's top priority for investment and decision-making. He's a member of the Governor's Children's Cabinet, twice chaired the Florida Partnership for School Readiness. He's the founding chair for the Children's Trust, a dedicated source of early intervention and prevention funding for the children in Miami-Dade. In 2002 and 2003, he chaired the Governor's Blue Ribbon Panel on Child Protection. In 2011, he chaired a similar panel for the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families. In 2002, he was a key figure in passing a statewide constitutional amendment to provide pre-K for all 4-year-olds. He's a board member and former chair of the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade on Monroe. An endowed chair in early childhood studies has been established in his name at the University of Florida College of Education, and the David Lawrence Jr. K-8 public school opened bearing his name in 2006. He's a graduate of the University of Florida and subsequently from the Advanced Management Program at the Harvard Business School. And if you haven't heard of Harvard, it's kind of a big deal. In 1988, he was honored with the John S. Knight Gold Medal. He's received 13 honorary doctorates, countless awards and honors, including Father of the Year, not the kind you get on the coffee cup, but an actual award given by the South Florida Father's Day Council. His wife, Bobby, is here with him, and I should mention she also is part of them winning Family of the Year. And if I spent this time now listing the rest of his awards and honors, we would have no time to actually hear from him this evening. Needless to say, this man is brilliant, a person who has used his education and influence to create a better world for our children and our community. Thank you so much for all the work you have done and continue to do to heal our broken world. It's my honor to invite to our bima David Lawrence Jr.
So that's all the time I have now. So I love the phrase, repairing the world. My gosh, does it need repairing. I've never seen an angrier time in our country in my lifetime. It is hateful, angry, and frankly destructive of the republic. And we'll pay a price for it, I promise you. Now, you heard an introduction, but some of you remember the late Paul Harvey. And Paul Harvey used to talk about the rest of the story. So here's part of the rest of the story. I'm as idealistic and optimistic as I was when I was Jake Wolf's age. Jake, you'd better be optimistic or I'm going to be really uptight. Okay. I am someone who leads a simple life. It's a simple life that's been blended with interviewing Fidel Castro for 5.5 hours and meeting the Pope in Rome and talking about Miami and Cuba and interviewing the President of the United States on Air Force One. And yes, Bobby and I had dinner some years ago with Queen Elizabeth. So we've lived a blessed life. But if you came to know me, you'd find we lead a simple life. I don't play golf. I don't play tennis. Please do not invite me on anything like that. And I can pass on the Super Bowl. I do know who is playing. But I'd rather read a good book, and I read at least a book a week every week. And it's usually history and biography because it scares me deeply, particularly with young people, that they are not learning history, at least in the way that I would want it taught. I've been to about 55 countries. Bobby and I are going to India in March. I've been to a bunch of countries that are not on the tourist path. We last went to Bangladesh to look at micro-lending, an interesting concept. I've been to the Democratic Republic of Congo, all of it, including the East, where so much evil has occurred. I have a passion for justice. I have been a life member of the NAACP for more than 30 years. And I think that if you came to my home, I know you would find a lot of books about prejudice, racism, anti-Semitism, hatred, etc. And frankly, I think some of it comes out of our marriage. We've been married for 52 years. I love my wife, Bobby, more than when we were married. I loved her then, I promise you. I frequently say I'm only as happy as my unhappiest child. Those of you who have children know exactly what I am talking about because they grow up and it turns out they've got adult problems like the rest of us. I think part of my prism of fairness comes from a mixed marriage. My wife is Jewish, I am Catholic. I feel a compulsion to be fair and sensitive to all. I never use the term politically correct. That's a pejorative. I think I have an obligation to be sensitive to everyone. I try to set an example. One challenge I frequently offer to people is tell me whom you had in your home in the last 6 months. Chances are most of us have people like ourselves. And that's not good for the future of Miami nor of America. We are trying something in this country that has never really been attempted before in the history of the world. We need to succeed at it. I expect good things from people. I expected good things from my own children, our own children. I expect good things from everyone. That is sometimes naive, but it has brought more good than otherwise. I don't often quote George W. Bush, but he said something when he was president that has always stuck with me. He talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. I think frequently we don't expect much from people. I think frequently teachers don't expect much from certain children. I believe that that has a better chance then of happening. I'm going to quote somebody now that if you look him up, you would be horrified that I am quoting him. It's Henry Ford I, and you might go and check him out, but Henry Ford I, who had a lot to do with the auto industry, was actually a fairly terrible human being inside, and had a newspaper devoted to, frankly, things like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and other evil myths, not true. But Henry Ford I once said, if you think you can change a thing or you think you cannot change a thing, you can. I think there is extraordinary power within the human soul. Extraordinary power to do good or not so good. The power of one is critical. This congregation is laced with that. It's what Lisa talked about a few minutes ago. Her own life, her own example. It's Rosemary Roth and the Reading Pals program. It's Alyssa Vanover with Breakthrough. It's Alan Bernstein with the Miami Music Project. It's Gene and Bill Soman, who have done so much for History Miami and lots of other institutions in this community. It's Christy Wolf and Marcia Talianoff and Anita Meinbach from the School of Education, which focuses on, at UM, community building. And while I believe deeply in goodwill and good people, I also know from reading a lot of history that goodwill is not enough to build change. What is seen as radical in one generation becomes the way the world is. Suffrage only came to this country in 1920. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt put into effect the Social Security Act in 1935, he was fought as communistic. I'm old enough to remember when Medicare in 1965, under the aegis of Lyndon Baines Johnson, it was thought to be by the AMA and many others as socialized medicine. And mark my words, the travail over the Affordable Care Act. Ultimately, we will come to accept and agree that every American is entitled to certain basics, and that includes a medical home and health insurance for everyone. All of this has been true. True for the civil rights movement. You might say to yourself, well, that was about minorities or black people. No, it wasn't. It was about an American sense of equity, fairness. The feminist movement, yes, was about women, but it was about an American sense of justice and fairness. And then I wonder about priorities. What are our priorities? How is it that we can spend $2 trillion, that's what we spend, to bring democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm not terribly optimistic this will come to be, folks. How can we spend that much money, however well intended? How can we have almost 1 out of every 4 children in the United States of America living in the full federal definition of poverty? What does that say about the richest, most generous country in the world? I spend my life focused on early childhood because I think if you ever got children off to a great start, they'd have momentum all their lives. We know the facts. We know that 85% of brain growth occurs by the age of 3. We know that 30% of children start school significantly behind, and then most of them get further behind, and they get, many of them, triage rather than taught. We know for any progress we've made, we also have 40% of third graders in the state of Florida who cannot read at minimally proficient levels. We know that we spend less than $2,500 on a pre-K slot for a 4-year-old and spend $20,000 to incarcerate an adult inmate and $50,000 to incarcerate a juvenile. What about our priorities? And how can it be that in this state, which if it were a separate nation would be the 20th largest economy in the world, 377 children, as legal as anyone in this room, don't have any health insurance? And if you want to know the consequences, my friends, in the real world. 3 out of every 4 17 to 24-year-olds in the United States of America cannot enter the American military because they have a substance abuse problem, a criminal justice problem, a physical problem, or an academic problem. You ought to worry about the national security of the country you love. We need to do something about it. You'll recall in Proverbs it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I think that still works. I want to close with a story about someone I'm mentoring. I think each of us has an obligation to work on some larger level and some individual level. I'm not going to give you the name of this person who is 11 years old, and you'll understand why I'm not using his name, because you wouldn't want his name used either. He's 11 years old. He lives in a part of our community where his mother doesn't allow him to go out and play because he can get shot. He's a wonderful little boy. I think he's going to be a wonderful man. He's one of 6 children. And you'll think I'm giving you a stereotype here, but I want you to hear the whole paragraph. Mother is 31 years old. She has 6 children, ages 4 to 14. His father is in prison for 15 years for heroin trafficking. And yet, if I could think of a mother who was doing a great piece of work with her 6 children, it would be his mother. She's found an individual school for each of these children, and this little boy goes to a school, a public school with a wonderful magnet, and this little boy takes 2 public conveyances, and it takes him 1 hour and 15 minutes each way. I don't imagine most of our children are doing that in this congregation and in this part of this community. And yet I'm convinced that this little boy is going to grow up to be an extraordinary citizen. He's thoughtful, got a great smile, he's getting better than ever grades. I know the principal of his school, and I've been to his school several times. And it is his own good fortune and mine that he is going to the Heat game for the first time this Sunday. Everyone in this room can make a difference in somebody's life. This is what this faith and this congregation is all about. Like you, I'm not saving my energy for the next world. I want to use it all up. And I want to close with one quotation. And the quotation comes from Horace Mann. And Horace Mann is more or less the inventor of American public education in the 19th century. American public education is an extraordinary invention in this country. 90% of children still go to public school. We better have good public schools or we're all in trouble. And Horace Mann in 1859, just as the Civil War is around the corner, spoke to the graduating class of Antioch College. And I only know one sentence that he gave during the commencement. And it was this: be ashamed to die before you have won some battle for humanity. Shabbat shalom. Thank you.